Welcome to Leadership from the Cross with Pastor Scott Thom. This broadcast is devoted to taking your ministry and life to the next level. No matter what the level you are at, let us help advance your leadership skills. Leadership from the Cross is a ministry of Cross Christian Fellowship in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And now, Pastor Scott Thom.
Once again, you're back listening to Leadership from the Cross. This is Pastor Scott Thom of Cross Christian Fellowship in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I know they say that on the intro and that sort of thing, but there's people who kind of tune out the intro and then or hit the 30-second fast forward button and don't even realize where we're at. So I like to occasionally say that's where we're at. I've got a special guest today, and I'm real excited about this because I love bringing in these guys who are actually doing it. It's not just theoretics, but we're actually hearing from men who are going out there and doing ministry and planting. And I remember this guy when we were getting ready to start our shepherd school, and I think we were a little bit into it.
About 3 weeks.
About 3 weeks. And here he was coming in, visiting the church, and had already, been a part of a church plant and just had this wonderful heart. Just, I could tell a guy who has vision, just a guy who had an idea of what God wanted to do and where to go, just would need a little bit of help and direction and somebody to be there, and that's not easy to find. And so we brought him into the school, and it was just gangbusters after that. And he became one of our church plants, and it was my honor to ordain this guy and send him out. And it was just a pleasure. And so now I can say Pastor Mark,
yes,
and before it wasn't. And it's so fun to say that. Pastor Mark Grothe, he's been pastoring Cross Fellowship Route 66. They've moved around a lot and done a lot. It's really neat. I'm really proud of some of the things that he's doing, which we're going to talk about, maybe a little bit of the hip hop ministry that's going on. But you came to the school and actually you came first to the church. Can you bring everybody up just a little bit of your background, and then that very moment of, okay, I'm going to plug into this school. I really don't know this knucklehead that's going to teach me, right? But just share a little bit about that, Mark.
Well, actually, the thing is, I kind of knew you a little bit. I had met you back in 2004 when Raw came out to Albuquerque, and it was just like a real brief encounter when you trained the volunteers. And then I would listen to your program on and off over the years. But my wife and I, like you had mentioned, we had been involved in a church plant, and that's where I met my wife at. And it was really awesome how God brought that together. I was brought on as the associate pastor, and the senior pastor had to step down for personal reasons, and I was kind of left with the boat. And his vision wasn't my vision, but I was supporting him. And the board of that church at that time said, well, we might as well just dissolve. And so we were kind of searching for a church, and we went to, we had gone back to Calvary to check it out, and I was sitting in a service, and I really felt like God was saying, I sent you out of here. Not that there's anything wrong with Calvary, but he was moving me on. We had gone to a couple of different churches, been involved with two churches that I can think of right off the top of my head for 2 to 3 years each. And the last church that we were at, I was the unofficial associate pastor, and was called out of that church and felt that God was moving me into a different direction than where that church was going. And it was kind of at that point, I had reached a burnout in ministry. Mm-hmm. Part of it was because I felt like we were carrying the load for the church, and I knew that that's not what we're supposed to be doing. And so we had not found a church for a couple of months. And I told my wife one day, I said, hey, I think I know where there's a church that we both can be fed. I've heard this guy for a couple of years, and I'm really getting stuff off from him, and I think you would enjoy it. So we sat down one Sunday morning, and we listened to one of your recorded messages that was on the website. And my wife said, I think we could go there. I think that would be someplace where I could learn from. And so the next Sunday we came, and for some reason I thought that your services were at 11 o'clock. And we pulled into the parking lot. It was 10:30, and we saw on the door that your services start at 10. And we thought, I'm not going to walk in at this time, not to the first time. So when we came when we actually came the next week, you were talking about the vision of the church, the vision of the shepherd school. I had remembered during one of your broadcasts about the shepherd school, and everything you were saying was hitting right on point of what I was just sharing with my wife as we were pulling into the parking lot that morning about what I would envision for a church for us to be starting. So I was very excited that I was able to capture your ear for 45 minutes that morning and be able to just to share about how it was lining up.
Yeah, and I remember that time because I could just immediately see your heart, immediately see that here was someone who I just got to get you in the school. We just got to help you do what God wants you to do. And you're in the school, and we don't want to go into too much detail about that, but through the school and doing that, God had put on your heart. Tell us about the calling God putting on your heart to actually go plant, because you'd been a part of a church plant. You'd seen churches kind of come up, go down, church struggles from the inside. And what gives a guy guts to go, and go do it from scratch?
All I have to say is it's all God, because I was just thinking about it. I don't think in our conversation that I did say anything about asking you to send me out, but you had said, I want you to be part of the school because I don't just send anybody out. And I was kind of thought, well, he must see something. So I had been involved in that church plant. I had been involved in another ministry start that I let go because I got involved with this church plant. And I really felt that God was calling me out to do church different. And I was just talking to another brother on the way over here too, that we've been doing church too much in the box, and we're missing a whole bunch of people we're not reaching out to, and feeling that God has put me in a position where He's used me to reach to those people, that I just had this vision of a church that we're not focused on if do we have to have a building, or can we just meet anywhere? That's one of the big things, and just being focused on the people and trying to reach out to them in a different way, whatever it would take.
And you launched, and you were in a different type of building. There was a program that reached the hurting and was in kind of our downtown area, and wasn't going to be the easiest church launch. And here you guys are, you're in with a building, sharing a building. Now that's how Cross Fellowship Albuquerque started. We started in a Methodist church that allowed us to use their building in the Sunday evenings. But you did the same thing. So tell us about that launch and that, just kind of that whole thing of going out again. And what was that like going into this building and your first services?
So it wasn't easy to step back out, because this is now the third ministry launch that I'm involved in, and really wanted to be focused on where God was. And so going downtown, it was an agreement between my wife and I, because I wanted to go back to the area where I was doing the Bible study in, but she wanted to go to an area where she grew up in, and right there in downtown was the middle spot. So I had gone around to different suite openings to see what was going to charge, and it was just not attainable at that time. But Noonday is where we started off. They were gracious. A couple of people had talked to me about maybe talking to them, so I went and sat down. I met with the director of Noonday, and I sat down and shared my heart with him. And he said, "We would love to help you, whatever it takes to." He said that come in. I would love to see this building used every day. Unfortunately, right now we have something going on Sunday, so you would have to work around our schedule. So we started off on Saturday night. It was kind of hard at first to differentiate us as a church where we're not a homeless ministry, but we were able to do that. It took some work, but we were able to do that.
Yeah, and you came in and you did a lot for the ministry as well. So they helped you out with building, but I remember you guys doing work around there, helping them out, and kind of accommodated one another. And one of the things that you began to do, it seemed like to me right away, is you were very active in getting different things going on. Like, talk about organizing, because I'm pretty amazed for a guy that is just launching a church, and you could tell you had some background. You were getting car shows going together.
Right.
You were getting concerts. You were having fun days. And I was like, okay, they'll have a bounty. You guys had this like NFL-sized things, bouncy houses and stuff. It was pretty cool. And you were doing this tremendous ministry down there. But talk a little bit about organizing those and what you would suggest guys doing.
It takes a lot of prayer first, because you really want to make sure that you're saturated with God and being involved in that. And it was just interesting. This conversation just came up a couple of weeks ago within a previous interview I was doing for. We need to network with other ministries, and in order to pull off events like that, where we're reaching out to people, where it's a bigger venue and we're just a small church. I mean, a handful of people coming in and being able to pull this off. It's really networking with other ministries and talking to the leaders and having a like mind, being able to reach to the lost.
And so you organized these groups, you contacted car clubs, you talked to musicians, you networked with other churches, you went to pastors' prayer groups and different things. So part of this, and a lot of guys don't think that that's very valuable, and they're very eclectic, or not eclectic, but they're very much in a clique, I should say, and they don't get out. And I think that's to their detriment. Was this one of the things you had always planned on, or something that you walked into? What did you think? What?
I think it comes from the background that I was brought up in. When I first rededicated my life, I was immediately into Bible college, and I met with professors from different backgrounds. And so I had that experience of reaching out and networking with other ministries already. I think that putting ourselves into that clique, into that box, it is detrimental to ourselves, because I look at, when I was part of the Baptist convention for a while, I was talking to the director of missions a couple of times, and I said that I had mentioned to him about how a lot of times where churches, what they do is they try to duplicate ministries. And a lot of times they try to do it because they need to have that ministry, or so they think, and they're doing it like 0.5%. Whereas if the churches or the ministries start working together, we can do something like that where we're doing it awesome, where we're being more effective. And so having that mindset, I went and talked to some of these ministry leaders and say, hey, this is what I'd like to see happen. I feel that God is working. And if we came together and we could work together, I think it would be something that he would bless.
Which is really insightful. So as a church plant model, what you've been able to do is focus in on something that would help multiple ministries be successful, because they're not spread so thin,
right,
or multitasking. Here they are. You're going to use partially what you do best, partially what they do best. Maybe they're doing worship, or they can attract people, or they can minister in different ways. Bringing it all together so that each group can benefit from this, and you're able to see just neat things happen. Do you have any stories about some of the people that might have been touched, or somebody who came along just from one of these types of outreaches that really mixed a multitude of ministries?
Well, I just think about with a recent event that we did, where we're in a park and we're reaching out to a different neighborhood that's not reached out to very often, and that took multiple ministries to be involved. We saw 4 rededications that day. And in one of those rededications, it was a guy who I had worked with before in the past with recovery. He was convicted when he was coming back he knew that he needed to let go of what was going on in his life, because he had slipped back into the old lifestyle again, and he because of the ministries coming together, he was convicted in his heart and knew that he needed to totally surrender and not hold back, because he was holding on to stuff from his past that was keeping him back from moving forward with the Lord. And being able to reach guys like that is where where we need to be able to help them to see that, it's all in. Mm-hmm. Both feet in the pool. It's not, we can't be on the edge of the pool dipping our toe in and say, well, is it going to be too cold? Or we need to just jump in, because when we jump in, that's when God's going to grab a hold of us and he's going to do amazing things in our lives.
Okay. Now we've got an individual who's listening to us right now, thinking about ministry. Maybe they've done a little bit of ministry like you, but now they're not. And you're talking about jumping in, can't just talk to the guys who are listening to this and they've got cold feet and they just don't want to get back into ministry.
Wow. Can I relate to that? When I mentioned that we had left that church, I was burned out in ministry. I didn't know if I wanted to go back into ministry, to be honest. But I just felt this tug that's where God wanted me to be. And it took some time. It took some healing on both my wife's and my part. My wife, unfortunately, it took longer for her. But it was about making sure I was surrounded by men who were going to encourage me and build me back up, spending time in prayer, spending time in the Word, just having that one-on-one time with the Lord, more with myself and the Lord, so that I could be restored. And then it finally came down to it, it just needed to jump right back in. And I knew that when I came here and was talking to you and just sharing my heart, and you were talking about plugging me back into the school, that was a big boost of encouragement for me. It was something that I needed to know that somebody was going to be behind me, a mentor. And that's what we need to make sure that we have, it's the Paul, Timothy, Barnabas model, where we all need to have a Paul, a mentor who's going to invest in our lives, a Barnabas who's going to be the guy who's going to be alongside of us encouraging, and a Timothy, somebody who we're going to be building up to replace us in ministry.
Very, very good. I mean, if we're not having that occur in our life, especially in ministry, you can burn out so quickly, or become bitter over these things. And like you said, and so many guys do get bitter and they don't ever get over it. And you seemed, although you're not mentioning certain things happening, but you had burnout and other things. And things happen in churches where guys, you get hurt. You get hurt in churches. Talk a little bit about maybe having that Paul, Timothy, Barnabas association, and just having the time, how that helped you get over that. And maybe was there something key that helped you get over that, or was that just time?
It was time. It was spending time with guys who, being under your mentorship and in having guys who would encourage me. And I think it wasn't too much. It wasn't too long after I started here that I had asked about starting a men's group and being able to be involved in encouraging the men in that group who came. And as a matter of fact, one of the guys came through the school after I graduated, which was exciting to me because we were starting to see that torch being passed on to other guys. When I know I have somebody I can call up and say, hey, I have this struggle, or I have this question, or I just need to talk, or I need prayer, to know that I have that encouragement, and I'm speaking for myself, whether it's my mentor or somebody who's going to be an encourager, that it makes it easier to do ministry, because ministry is hard.
Yeah.
I always tell guys, you think you want to be a pastor? Be sure that you're ready to be, that's your calling, because it's probably the hardest hit position that people are going to take. And I'm just being real, because, we're out there up front, and so people are going to think that we need to be perfect. And quite honestly, we're not. But we need to be willing to be real and say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake, and I need to ask for forgiveness. And then being able to take that and going in and to invest in men and say, okay, here, let me share some things with you. Maybe this will help. And seeing some of that fruit come out where they're starting to take it to heart and being willing to maybe come to school or getting involved in ministry or passing that torch on to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because ministry is hard. It's extremely rewarding, Somebody once said, why be a pastor when you can smack yourself repeatedly in the head with a hammer?
Right.
So, but we see that, and we see that fruit coming from your ministry and guys getting fed and built up and being used by the Lord. And part of that, which has been good, and it's also been a struggle because you guys have been doing outreaches now with music,
Right.
taking a little criticism, but also seeing some fantastic things happen, working with local artists. Why don't you just share a little bit about that, about reaching out, about going into a genre that is reaching a, I guess you would say, a niche market, or sometimes people that we're not actually getting to, or not, we're ignoring them. So share a little bit about doing that ministry.
So, okay. So hip hop, we're talking about hip hop.
We're talking about hip hop.
So it's one of those genres where people start associating gangs and drugs and prostitutes and street people and people. I've heard this over time, even before we even launched the ministry officially, where, well, hip hop and rock don't belong in the church. And you hear that and you kind of like, you get those attacks and you kind of think, well, you're missing out on a whole bunch of people that are not going to come to church otherwise. I'm talking to pastors and leaders throughout the country now, who we're beginning to see that, and I'm not beating up the church on this, but this is where we're missing the mark, where we come into church and we're listening to contemporary music, we're listening to the old hymns, maybe a little bit of gospel, or just depending on the church, but we're people who are maybe hip hop or even rock, where they come in and we're turning them off by the music. And I know that worship's not supposed to be about us, but when we're reaching out to somebody who doesn't even know the Lord yet, and they're coming in and they're hearing Amazing Grace, and I grew up with that, I don't want to listen to that's not me. If we use something like this to reach out to them where they're starting to listen, well, it's a different type of music where they're getting the message, and that's what we're trying to do, is use that type of thing to get the message across to them. It's yes, we may associate it with this, but it doesn't have to be that way. We're redeeming it for the Lord's purpose.
Right, and you're doing it with mostly local artists.
Yes,
and that's something that, as you look at it, I thought was just kind of genius, because here are a bunch of local artists who, and by local, I mean within, a few cities.
right.
And they want a place to operate, hone their music, to serve God, to minister and see people get saved. And so you're able to bundle this together, get some groups together, rotate people in, let them be used, get some of your guys that was there. But this can be, you could lose control of this pretty fast, and it could be like herding cats.
Right.
But how did you pull that off, and how do you manage that and kind of keep it sane? Because they can get off the wall. How do you keep it sane? How do you rope them in? But then how do you also allow them to have enough freedom to do this? Because this reminds me a little bit of when Chuck Smith got such pushback because he let rock music come into the church. And here you had Mustard Seed Faith and some of these early Christian artists coming in and playing guitars and playing drums and rock and roll, and it's all of the devil or whatever. And yeah, you can get emotional, you can get off the wall with it, just like anything else. But you kind of have to herd this, and you're working with some young artists. You got some people with some experience.
Right.
How are you dealing with that?
Well, again, covering it with prayer. I'll go back to my fallback is prayer.
Yeah.
But before I allow somebody to be up front, because when we're doing it, especially when we're doing an event, I want to make sure that they're not going to come off half-cocked and just be screwball about what they're doing. I like to spend time with them and talk to them first to get to know the person. Maybe if I allow somebody who comes in kind of half-cocked, I might allow them maybe a shorter amount of time, just because we're trying to reach to the artists as well. We're not just reaching to the people who are lost, but we're reaching to the artists too. We're trying to come alongside of them and mentoring them. And part of that also is having guys from other ministries who are doing similar stuff to be involved, that we're coming together and we're working together to build these guys up, because we can just put on a concert and just leave it at that. But most of the guys who are involved with the hip hop revival or the It's All Good When God's in the Hood, which is another ministry that's just kind of developed, we want to make sure that they're on board, not for themselves, but they're out there bringing the message. And so we actually have there's one of our guys is going to be coming to the school, I understand, and I'm already talking to another one of the guys to get his application in. And there was another guy who had his application in. I'm encouraging him to come back in and to so that they can get built up and be able to have better messages when they're bringing their music. But and then we're having to bring a couple of these guys really close to me and just pouring out into them and mentoring them and building them up, so that as other guys come on board, then I'm not just doing it by myself mentoring it. There's other guys mentoring, and I can start trusting them to say, hey, Pastor Mark, I want to bring this guy in and know that they're going to be above board.
Yeah. And you're getting pretty good response from the people who actually show up. You guys are getting the word out through their ministries. How are you getting the word out? Is it through the normal, cards that are handed out, social media? How are you getting the message out and you're getting a pretty good response of people coming in and ministry happening? I
highly recommend social media. That's where I've been finding the biggest results about getting the message out. We do put out, a couple of the guys will go out and put flyers out, but social media has been a big response for us. And it's also getting the ministers or the artists who come and getting their fan base and letting them know that they're going to be out there, and encouraging anybody who we talk to bring friends who don't know anything about this.
And you've also taken a little bit of this to the local Christian stations.
Yes.
And gotten interviews and that sort of thing. Would you recommend that?
Of course. I mean, the more that we can get out in the front lines, where with the local, with radio or television or whatever it takes, the more we can get out there, the more that people start hearing about what's going on.
And so we begin to see some of these artists. Some of these artists are growing right in front of you and doing that. Have you stepped back, or are you doing most of the teaching or preaching, or you let them step up now and give altar calls, or how are you handling this as far as not just a concert, but actually reaching the lost?
So our hip hop revival events, the way we start off with that is that we start off with worship. One of the guys, he comes in, and it's not just the contemporary worship. It's a flavor of hip hop flavor. And after he done with that, then I give a message. Right now, we're working on building up guys to give the message. But right now, I'm the one who gives the message during the hip hop revival events, and then just going from there. And then every time one of the guys are going up, most of the time they're sharing their testimonies.
Mm-hmm.
And
powerful.
And in their testimonies, they're throwing out the net to see if there's anybody else who needs to surrender.
Very cool. And you've now moved from that place, got your own place, which isn't always easy, and modifying a place. And if you're not buying, you're leasing from someone. And usually ministries can't buy or build their own place for years and years, sometimes decades, before they're able to afford that and do that. But how have you been able to do that and modify the building you're in to accommodate this?
Trust in God. It really was to get this place was because Noonday was selling their building, and we knew we had to move, and stepping out and like, all right, Lord, I don't know where the funds are going to come from, but I'm going to trust you and start looking. And this place, it just kind of fell into our laps. I think it was somebody contacted you from another church here, and you sent on the email, and I just called, and the way it was nice, it was really God ordained, because even the rent wasn't that expensive that we couldn't afford to do. And so we moved in, and there were some things that needed to happen to the place, but we kind of made do with what we had. Like the bathrooms are towards the front of the sanctuary. And so every time anybody goes to the bathroom, they have to, it could be a distraction. But thankfully, one of the guys here in town had some partitions that we could partition off the bathrooms for now. And then last year, I just kind of threw it out there and say, hey, I would love to build a wall with doors and paint the church. And there was people in the fellowship who just stepped up and gave, and because they saw what God was doing with our ministry. And so they wanted to be involved that way. So they gave. And then I got to see, it was really cool because from January till June of last year, because it was just a slow process. Every Saturday, the guys would show up and they would be involved in the building or cleaning or painting and redecorating. And it was just neat to sit back and watch the fellowship that was going on amongst the guys as they were doing that.
And part of that is just sharing the vision, just sharing, here's what we can do. And if we get together and do this, type of thing, what God can do. So it's a little Nehemiah thing. Hey, let's build a wall so that
right.
we could have a separation there between the bathrooms and the kitchen area and stuff like that.
And one of the guys kept talking about that because I had taught when we were at Noonday. I had taught through Nehemiah. And so he kept bringing it up. Oh, Pastor, you're talking about, look, this is our Nehemiah wall.
Amen. So you've been encouraging guys in your own ministry to get with the CCF college and especially the Shepherd School program that we have. You've been through it. You put guys through it. You've been to your own other schooling. What benefited you the most out of that when you were going to, for those 2 years?
So you're right. I've been through other schooling, and when you go to a college or a university, that most of the time you can expect to sit in a classroom and be lectured to. And although that the one of the colleges I went to, there was some of the interaction, I don't think that any other school is like this one, where there's so much interaction. Where yes, you're giving a lecture for a period of time, but that's not what the whole school is built on. It's built on developing the relationship, the mentor-mentee relationship, and in putting it to practice, and taking some of the audio files and actually listening to what some of these guys that went through, like bivocational pastors like myself, and I forget the one who was doing it for 15, 20 years, finally retired, now can be full-time ministry, and thinking about, okay, if that's what you want me to do, Lord, I'm okay with that, but it's hard, right? But knowing that, and then just having that interaction with the guys and with you and the leaders that you had brought in, and I really think that it's really beneficial because we kind of form this body where we can call each other up and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, or hey, can you pray for me on this type of aspect? Yeah,
it's that connection, I think most of the guys are saying, that absolutely takes learning to a whole nother level exponentially, because you're not just sitting there being talked at or taught at, but you're interacting and asking questions. And so the growth, and we've seen that growth, and we've scheduled the school like that. Now, online, it's a little bit different. There's discussion boards and video and some webinar things like that. Locally and in the actual school, which we do only every 2 years or every other year, so to speak. And these guys will oftentimes keep me till 11:30, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning and going, which is actually, I complain about it, but I love it because it's so much fun. But it's something that I think is so important to the growth and to the maturity of the individual to be able to have that connection and interaction with at least one professor, not just like a student advisor you see every quarter or once or twice a year, but somebody who's there who's really taken an interest in your life and doing that. And I think that's really quite the power of it type thing. So, Mark, anything that you'd like to share about ministry, about your ministry going on, before we wrap this up?
Well, I just go back to that we can't do church in the box anymore. We really need to get outside of ourselves. We need to get outside of the walls. I still have envisioned where there's a ministry that I'm praying about, where it's going to involve the hip hop ministry. It's going to involve the recovery, where what we're doing is we're bringing church out into the streets. Because we to be contained in our walls, where people are not knocking on the front doors of the church anymore.
No,
it's not like the 70s and 80s and even 90s where people were coming to see, oh, there's church. Well, I'll go over there. We need to be interactive in our communities. And so just don't be inside the box. Don't put yourself in a peg hole where it's hard to get out of.
Amen. Wholeheartedly agree. Well, we're just about wrapping it up, but if somebody's listening to this and they're like, man, I'd like to learn more about this ministry and what you're going on, Mark, how can they get a hold of you?
So there's a couple of ways. They can go to our website, cross66.org. There's a spot on there where you can ask for more information, prayer request. It tells a little bit about our ministries, or they can just email me, cross66info@gmail.com.
And they're number 66.
Yes, the number 66.
Not spelling out 66.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thanks, brother.
Thank you.
So we want to invite you to check out the Bible College at ccfcollege.com, and you can find more information about the school there, obviously. And there's links to crossfellowship.org if you want to get information about our affiliates or anything else we're doing. And we would love to hear from you if you want to connect with us or connect with Pastor Mark. And you can do so by those links or the email addresses that were given. And until next week, blessed wishes to you, Pastor Scott Thom, signing off.
You have been listening to Leadership from the Cross with Pastor Scott Thom of Cross Christian Fellowship in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Check out Pastor Scott's ministry training school and his other radio show, No Other Doctrine, by visiting our website at crossfellowship.org. That's crossfellowship.org. Also, you can visit our Facebook page at Facebook.com/Leadership from the Cross.